Cheers guys, Epix911. Welcome to my top 10 virtual reality games all time. That's right guys, all frickin' time, no holds barred. Unlike the last video, no criteria in terms of a specific year. This isn't a had to have been published in X years. If it came out for the big three, and you'll notice I'm using controllers, I almost, at the end of the last video, destroyed my Rift, falling in spectacular fashion, ass over tea kettle. Wasn't pretty, but thankfully the Rift saved, so we're gonna stick to just controllers for this one. I'm gonna indicate the platform it came out for again of the big three, and then talk about the game a little bit. It is gonna be in order. I'm laying it all out. It's a subjective opinion, but with that said, I expect it to get heated in the comment section. People all have their own opinions. I'm going to do my best to defend my selections. So with that said, guys, let's start with number 10. And number 10, Skyrim VR for PlayStation VR. I laid it out in the last video. We don't have to rehash all of that. If you haven't seen it though, I'll just sum it up. The reason I went with PlayStation VR is I didn't want to be burdened by the hit or miss of the mod system. If I want mods, I'll load up the PC version, play it on a monitor, and load up, the usual selection of mods that I enjoy. I wanted the challenge of playing and judging the game based on its own merits, and that means vanilla content, period. Sure, you can beat the main storyline, and we've had this debate before. I have beat it in 8 to 10 hours, and there are people who've beat it without cheats even faster, but that's totally not the point of Skyrim VR. If it is, sorry, but you might be playing it for the wrong reasons. Skyrim is about, sure, following the main storyline if you want, but stopping to enjoy things that you discover along the way. One of my favorite things, and vanilla kind of rekindled that for me, because when you add a bunch of mods, you start to want to go in those directions and explore that content. Playing vanilla all over again with no mods, I was able to just pick a direction, march into the horizon, and stumble into some amazing, amazing stuff. Sometimes it was in pursuit of the main storyline. Other times it was, fighting a bandit, finding an encampment, some long lost, never explored dungeon, coming across artifacts and enemies that were just brilliantly done. And had you gone through that same route 100 different times, you may not have stumbled upon it. That to me sums up Skyrim and why it's my number 10. Number 9, guys, and this one for the Oculus Rift, Lone Echo. I talked in the other video about how this is a game that knocked zero-G out of the park for me. It's hard with our earth-bound gravity to portray zero gravity effectively. Yet Lone Echo somehow manages to do that. The navigation system in that game is absolutely brilliant. It's also a very linear game. So for linear games, one of the things I look for, and Final Fantasy X is a perfect example of that, is how tight the storyline and the characters within that linear progression are. The tighter they are, the more convincing, the more immersed into the storyline you become, the less it matters that it's linear. And Lone Echo, in that respect, guys, delivers in absolute spades. Just a fantastic game, seeing you play the part of an AI and learning to cope with zero gravity, the control systems of the ship, the control systems for yourself and those around you feels natural. You feel as if you are this awakening AI unit. In short, brilliant job. Number 9, Lone Echo. Number 8. Yes, from time to time, I criticize wave-based games. And based on that criticism alone, you'd think or probably come to the conclusion that I don't like wave-based games. Not true. What I don't like is wave-based games that don't bring anything new to the table. Arizona Sunshine is my number 8 title, and believe it or not, guys, this is an honest to goodness tie. Vive Rift equally. I can play it on both. Whatever I happen to have hooked up, if I get the urge for that game, I play it on that platform. What I love about Arizona Sunshine, guys, what I was saying earlier is the game doesn't take itself too seriously. The main character, you, comes across a lot like the Duke Nukem character did in the first Duke Nukem 3D game, right? The one that we played in the late 90s or mid 90s. And what I mean by that is the character doesn't take himself serious. He's got self-deprecating humor, snarky as all hell. Well, the personality in Arizona Sunshine, every bit as frickin' snarky. Is it cliched? Yeah, absolutely. At first glance, what do you see? Wave-based games, or wave-based game, lots of frickin' zombies, lots of ammunition and arms to take out said zombies. But it doesn't follow the stereotypes and the cliches. You'd expect a dark, horror-filled game with a equally dark palette. Not so here. Arizona Sunshine throws you into the deserts of Arizona, gives you a brilliantly colorful palette, and then throws in that snarky humor for an experience, really, guys, like no other. The closest, again, a game 20 plus years old, Duke Nukem 3D. So definitely recommend. And my number 8, Arizona Sunshine. And then we've got number 7, the Talos Principle. This is a game I prefer on the HTC Vive. This is a game that, again, at first glance, you think it's a puzzle game. How much fun could it possibly be? You know what? I'll get to it when I'm in the mood for puzzles. Now, longtime viewer, Chris Brower, he wasn't going to take that. No, he had a concerted campaign, definitely a one-effort goal of getting me to play that game. And I am so glad he did, because the game is so much more than just a puzzle game. And even as a puzzle game, it excels. Yeah, it appeals to my love of history, but what I love most is the progression of the puzzles. A lot of puzzle games, they get the pacing all wrong. They could have hard puzzles mixed in with easy puzzles at a time where it doesn't make sense to put the player up against those more difficult puzzles. The beauty of the Talos Principle is you start off easy, and before you know it, you're manipulating half a dozen different objects and fiendishly difficult puzzles, but finding yourself prepared to tackle them. And it's got a storyline to boot, if you care. If you don't, play it as a puzzle game. Again, another thing that I like about it. So yeah, the Talos Principle, 2017 game, yes, but one that quickly worked its way into my top 10 list. Thank you, Chris. Which brings us to number 6. And this is, again, another tie, Rift, Vive, Audio Shield. It's also another Chris Brower exclusive. You see, I played Audio Shield when it first came out, and it was okay. It was a good game, but other stuff caught my interest, and before I knew it, Audio Shield was kind of on the back pile. And then eventually, after many, many months, I just never picked it up again. Well, Chris also wouldn't have that, and definitely encouraged me not to just try the game again, but to play to its strengths. So I did, and again, I'm glad I did. Thank you, Chris. The reason is you can enjoy the game on your terms. Sure, you can have a set playlist. You can even play the songs they have in their own library, but you can also do stuff like log on to YouTube, search for music videos. The video will play in the background, not just the audio, but the actual visuals in whatever stadium you select. The leaderboard concept taps into that old arcade high score kind of dopamine addiction where competition for high scores, it was almost enough to just drive people to want to play a game. And Audio Shield absolutely taps into that. You will become obsessed with wanting to beat not just your score, but your friends' scores on those same titles, and of course scores worldwide. But, and this is what I wanted to talk about, playing the game on difficulty levels other than easy, night and day experience. You go from a game that comes across more as a kind of a novelty to a game that truly excels. It's got everything in terms of hand-eye coordination, reflexes, rhythm, enjoying the complexities and nuances of a song through physical action. Try it, guys. If you've only played Audio Shield on the easiest setting, try it on difficult or elite. You're in for a treat. Absolutely, you are in for a treat. Then coming in at number 5, Google Earth VR. Now, owing to some bugs that I experienced with the Rift, I'm going to have to give the nod to the HTC Vive for Google Earth VR. I've got videos on this. I've talked about it. We're not going to rehash it 10 ways to Tuesday. Suffice it to say, it taps into so many things that I love. History, geography, travel. Guys, it almost doesn't matter what you personally enjoy. There's gonna be some fun that you can derive out of Google Earth VR. Whether it's looking into a childhood memory associated with a location, your family's first vacation somewhere, right? Where you celebrated your honeymoon, all kinds of physical locations associated with past events. You can relive those to a certain extent within Google Earth VR. If you love traveling, but maybe you're bogged down in school, post-secondary studies, you can pick up Google Earth VR and you can go to Rome. You can go to Paris, the City of Lights. You can visit the North Wonder that is northern Iran. It's not desert. It's animal-filmed, luscious mountain slopes to ski on, and stereotype Middle East shattering. And the list goes on. All kinds of locations to enjoy. Google Earth VR. Next up, number 4, Fallout 4 virtual reality. I place this higher than Skyrim because I'm kind of judging it differently. It's a lot newer of a game than Skyrim was. Some of the mods work on this title. I prefer it on the HTC Vive. It works on the Rift, and I've showed that in a video. It definitely had the usual Bethesda type of bugs on launch that Bethesda games usually have, but it also delivers in terms of all the goodies that Bethesda games bring to the table. And in my opinion, those goodies outweigh the negatives. Plus, what is a negative for some people isn't necessarily a negative for others. For example, for me, from the get-go, the game worked. It performed fine. Yes, there was a little bit of reprojection, but nothing like what some people were reporting. I also didn't have to roll back the creators update. I have the creators update and it runs fine with it. There's reprojection, but not to the level of some people. So remember, there is no one fix solution. I've spoken to people who rolled back the creators update and still experienced the problem. Admittedly, it does work for some, but let's be clear, it doesn't work for everybody. Unfortunately, yeah, that's going to be the experience for some people. For me, that wasn't the case. Instead, I got my dream come true, guys. An RPG, like with Skyrim, that I could explore in virtual reality. Here is a virtual world. It's not randomized, but fully designed and developed to be explored, and it's post-apocalyptic to boot. Get your Mad Max on and explore. And that's what I've been doing. Absolutely fantastic. Number 3, now we're getting into familiar territory, guys. Titles that I've often talked about. Are they still in my top 3? We'll find out. Are they still in the same order? We'll find out. But I think we can safely say there's been some movement when I say that my number 3 VR game all time, Raw Data. This was a title that used to be number 1, then dropped to 2, and now, well, you'll see when I talk about number 2, has dropped to 3. I prefer to play this game on the HTC Vive. What I love about this game can't be really easily summed up, but I'm going to do my best. What I love about it is the attention to detail. You see, there are a lot of games that get released into early access that can be fairly criticized. And I say fairly criticized because they have willingly, knowingly, perhaps, launched a product not ready for prime time. Some keep that covenant with the people who invested in the early access, and they improve it over time. Others, shamefully, will release that early access into full versions without fixing underlying issues plaguing those titles. Raw Data burst onto the scene from the frickin' get-go, guys, as a quality title. And one that they repeatedly, Survios I'm talking about, added content to, that those of us who invested in that promise early capitalized on. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, for what I paid for Raw Data, they have delivered in spades. Update after update that not only fixed bugs, but were feature-rich updates. Take a look at the initial early access release to the full version release and look at the difference, guys. I challenge you to criticize that difference. We've got multiplayer modes that used to not exist, co-op modes that didn't exist, new maps, new weapons, new classes, new forms of gameplay. In short, they delivered. And it's wave-based. But, like with Arizona Sunshine, it's found wave-based on its own terms. For me, Raw Data was a game that did take itself a bit more serious, but through its setting and its atmosphere, was able to transcend just being another frickin' wave-based game. And that is what I loved about Raw Data. Quality. If you didn't tell somebody that Survios was an indie company when this first game came out, if you just had them plug in and play that experience, I guarantee you 9 times out of 10 they would have assumed it wasn't indie, but a AAA publisher dev behind the title. That's the type of quality I'm talking about, and ultimately it's a game I still play and why it's my number 3. Raw Data from Survios. Here we are, guys, the last 2. This one might be expected, but it also might be a shocker for some. The reason this is my number 2, guys, is it is a game that absolutely destroyed my expectations, positive way. This is a game that I expected a bit from, but way, way, way over-delivered. I'm talking about Resident Evil 7 Biohazard for the PlayStation VR. A game, and I said this in the other video, but I'm going to repeat it, that single-handedly desensitized and destroyed the ability for me to watch horror movies. I watch them now, guys, without so much as a raise in heart rate because of this game. This game delivered for me sheer, absolute, immersive terror. And a wonderful setting to boot, a memorable cast of characters, one of the most demented and inbred families this side of Wrong Turn. I mean, just absolutely fantastic on all counts. Pacing, amazing. The exploration to your next encounter, again, perfectly paced and staged. The game was so good. It was only after that I realized, you know what? This was a seated VR experience. This wasn't one that I played standing up or 360. It was seated with a gamepad. And yet, didn't even cross my mind because I was so frickin' immersed in the game. Does it have negatives? Of course it does. For example, it does rely on jump scares, but like I said in the other video as well, it knows how to build suspense and deliver terror in other ways. I challenge you to get through your first encounter with the patriarch of that family and not be impressed and absolutely and utterly terrified. It's just fantastic. Number 2, Resident Evil 7, PlayStation VR. Well, guys, that brings us down to the last entry, number 1. Here's a title that has had virtual reality support as part of its initial DNA, even though it wasn't ever developed fully as a virtual reality game, and yet delivered more immersive virtual reality than dozens, hundreds of specific for VR titles. Talking about Elite Dangerous. A game that, guys, lived up to that fantasy that I had of feeling like I was truly piloting a spaceship. There's other games that do that now in VR, but in Elite Dangerous, guys, it truly feels like you're piloting a spaceship. And I'm going to give the nod to the Rift version. There's a bunch of reasons. It doesn't have to do with the technology so much as the unwillingness for the programmers responsible for the Vive version to fix the deficiencies. And one of those, and to me the most unforgivable, is the fact that you are in space, and yet space doesn't feel like space. It feels like a painting 20 feet away from your window. Space should feel like it's infinite and in the distance. And in that respect, the Rift is just the superior version. It also plays to the strengths of a non-Fresnel lens design. And what I mean by that is, one of the pitfalls of the Fresnel lens design is that any text that's not at the dead center of your lens, that's out on the periphery, is going to be blurrier. That's inherent in the lens design. The Rift, being a hybrid, doesn't suffer from that. So your display panel, which is kind of the point of Elite because you've got controls laid out in front of you and all around you, they are crisper on the Oculus Rift. Still absolutely playable on the Vive. It would probably still be close to number 1 on the Vive, but if you're asking me which I prefer, yeah, it would be the Rift version for Elite Dangerous. There's not much else to say about Elite, guys. Like I said, this is a game that truly delivers. My ultimate fantasy game all time would be a game where I can fly spaceships, do trade. The spaceship has role-playing stats that I can better, like Elite does. It's an RPG light in that respect, but like the promise of a Star Citizen, I want to have a character likewise with stats that can get out of that ship, explore dungeons, space stations, surfaces. That hasn't come to fruition yet, but on the spaceship side of that equation, Elite Dangerous absolutely delivers, and for not much more money, they've added a hell of a lot of content to that first experience. True, the Star Citizen promise ultimately is greater and bigger, but it's a lot slower to get to fruition. Elite Dangerous, not the case. It's had that entire universe for you to explore, and it's been fleshing it out steadily since it was playable on the DK1. My number 1 game still is Elite Dangerous. Well, there you have it, guys. Again, as with the last video, let me know what your top 10 VR games. If you did that on the other video, fair enough, I've got those. But if you haven't, it doesn't have to be in order. Hell, throw up 20 for all I care. If you've got the time and desire, though, let me know what your top VR games on the big 3. I'd love to see them. Guys, as always, cheers.